Welcome back to Murder with Friends. Right now we're going to be unpacking the kidnapping and murder of JonBenét Ramsey and going over a little bit of the evidence and what that means. I'm joined again by Sam Shocker. So Sam, let's just get right into it.
Okay.
This is the juicy part of this story. Let's talk about the timeline of when JonBenét was discovered to be missing, how that went down, the phone call, all of that. Let's talk about the timeline.
Okay.
So this took place December
26th, right?
Wee hours of the morning. Patsy Ramsey wakes up. Do we know why was she just up early at 5?
I believe she was up early, and I believe if my memory serves me correctly, she started to make coffee first, and then she did her normal round. She went over into the laundry room to start to do laundry, and that's when she noticed, JonBenét's door was open. She went in there and saw that JonBenét was missing, and then she went frantic, and that's when her brother had heard the mother screaming, "My baby, where's my baby?" And then everybody woke up, and then they called the police.
And then there was the discovery of the note.
Yes.
Of the ransom note,
Yes.
which I think it's important to note of the ransom note that it was just sort of discarded at the bottom of the stairs.
Right.
I don't know a lot about how ransoms have worked. It's sort of a phenomena that we know only in movies and television. I know that it exists in the real world, but the way that it happens seems a little bit bizarre in this case. That the note wasn't laid out in a prominent spot.
The note is so bizarre. It's
Yeah.
such a bizarre part of the story, and we can dive into what it says, how it's like 3 pages long, but we do know that the note came from a notepad and a pen from inside the house. So it seems so outlandish to think that a murderer is going to sit down after murdering someone, or even during the murder, before the murder, in a home and carefully write out a 2.5-page ransom note while the
family
is
still
in the house.
But let's back up a little bit before we get into. There's so much to talk about with the note.
You mentioned the note.
The note. I know, and we're gonna
Yes.
go in on that
Okay,
note.
good.
But
all right.
what I want to talk about is still a little bit of the timeline.
Okay, so
Patsy
yes.
Ramsey makes that phone call to 911 that we have heard. We've heard so many times before. She hangs up, or she thinks she hangs up. And then apparently she didn't actually click or something like that. And so there has been some speculation on Patsy talking to a male figure, probably John Ramsey, but then some people have said that there was a third voice in the background that this 911 dispatcher listened in on. Now, we don't have access. I don't think that tape has been released. We've only heard the tape of when she thinks she hangs up. The other tail end of that has not been released for the public yet, although I'm ready for it.
Right.
And
many people speculating that it would be
Burke. Because it looks like it sounds like a higher pitched voice.
Which
That's
you
what
would think,
people
big
say.
deal, Burke's in the kitchen, but then that goes against the family's story when they initially told investigators is that Burke was upstairs the entire time. He never got up from bed. He heard everything and he decided to stay upstairs. So then that would go against what she initially told the investigators.
And the investigators came over pretty quickly after placing this call. And they're on the scene and they think that this is a kidnapping at this point in time because they've located the note. And the note says that we're going to be calling you guys at, what is it?
At 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, but yeah, there was a specific time.
Actually, let me look up when, say I have the ransom note right here. I carry it with me at all times. They're going to call between 8 and 10 p.m.
Right.
That's when they say that they're going to be calling.
Right.
So investigators are over, and then you have the FBI because it's a kidnapping, and this is a contaminated scene. Now, they didn't know this at the time because they thought it was a kidnapping, but friends of the Ramsey family are coming over to support. There are a lot of people at the Ramsey house, and the Ramseys have said that they've searched all the houses. They say that they've found everything, but that's just not the case. I honestly don't think they looked hard enough if your kid was missing because
they didn't search every room.
Yeah.
They did not search every room.
Because John does end up finding the body, and we have a quick clip that we're going to throw to of how that went down.
Police, what's going on at 5515th Street? What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Police say her father, John Ramsey, found JonBenét with a nylon cord wrapped around her neck. Her wrists were tied above her head, and her mouth was covered by duct tape. An autopsy revealed the girl was killed by strangulation and a skull fracture sometime before dawn. Her parents said an intruder entered their home and killed their daughter, but authorities say there was no sign of forced entry. In fact, Boulder police found other evidence that raised their suspicions about the Ramsey.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was the discovery of the body, and I think it's important to note that John Ramsey discovered the body in his basement. And a lot of times you just hear they discovered the body in the basement. How did they not look in there before? There were many rooms in this basement. There was a game room. She was actually in the wine cellar portion of the room. It still strikes me as odd that if it were me, I don't have kids, but I really would look in every single possible place
nook
in that home.
and cranny, under beds. I mean, if a child is going to hide out, they're going to find a small space to hide in.
Yeah.
And a huge red flag is that he immediately, not a red flag necessarily pointing that he did it, but red flag to contaminate the investigation is the fact that he immediately picked her up and ran her up the stairs.
And took the duct tape off her
Everything,
mouth?
Yeah, and that immediately for the investigators, that is going to limit what they find.
Of course, and then she was lay down under the Christmas tree, and as you can't fault anyone for this,
sad.
But of course the family and the friends around there were going to check on her. Is she okay? What's going on?
Chills.
I mean, this scene from the get-go was completely contaminated because already there were so many people there.
Right.
You know, it wasn't as if he went down to the wine cellar and found the body. Oh my gosh, let me call the police. It was that there was another guy with him when he found the body. You know, and then when you lay the body down, and Patsy Ramsey says that she, hugged her child to her cheek and just wanted to feel her kid. And how are you to say that you can't do that? But it definitely, early on, there was not a lot of oversight from the police and also from the FBI, who were both on site. And it makes me wonder, and I guess this is, my question for you, why were they not more thorough? Why were they not, why weren't they more careful from the beginning? I think potentially it could have been because you had both the FBI and the Boulder police there, and there was sort of this odd authoritative dynamic. What do you think?
That's a good point. There, absolutely. It's almost, if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, you can't really, dot your I's and cross your T's because you think they're handling this, you're handling that, when in reality everyone's doing their own thing. And it's almost like this unorganized chaos instead of an organized chaos, because crime scenes are chaotic, but it's usually very diligently organized.
Right.
And I think in this case too, it also, your condition, especially in a small community like this, where perhaps there isn't, I don't know their crime statistics, but
this was the
typically,
first crime.
Thank
this
you.
is the only crime that year.
So you can imagine, and this is a well-to-do family. And
only
all
murder,
that,
not the only crime.
Right, murder.
Boulder, crime-free. It's the only murder that year.
But it also, it serves to just psychologically, in their subconscious, these are investigators who perhaps know of the family. They immediately think, oh, ransom note, family, crying, kidnapping. And so maybe they did not think that they were looking in the house to discover her. Mm-hmm. So I think that they did not follow proper protocol because, and this is just subconsciously, because they probably initially believed that it was a kidnapping as well, because it followed all of that.
I think you bring up a really good point about the influence of this family and how that might have subconsciously played into the police work that went on during the investigation in the very beginning.
Initially.
In the initial stages of the investigation, because this was a very wealthy family. This was a family that was prominent in the community in their own way, as we talked about earlier. And I have heard reports, and this is again sort of speculation, but people have gone on record saying that they were instructed not to really look too hard into the Ramsey family initially and let them grieve, which isn't wrong. But if you know anything about investigating a murder, you need to talk to everyone that was in that area immediately. You can't wait 4 months down the line. And that was something that they didn't do.
There's a lot of things that this police department did not do.
And
and it's not fair. Believe me, I'm not saying that the Ramseys are innocent, and I'm not saying that they're guilty, but I will say, and you can't argue the fact that there are so many holes in this case. Some of it, of course, because of the fact that of the circumstantial evidence on both sides can point to either direction, but more so, it was almost as if they started to follow what theory they believed, and then they were blinded to any other theories.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on a little bit, because I don't think we made it super clear how JonBenét was actually killed.
Oh my goodness.
What happened? Because this is
chilling.
also a convoluted part of this story.
This is two conflicting theories as well.
Right. So initially it was reported that she was strangled. She had, I always forget what this is called, a graffit?
Garroted.
It's a garret.
So she suffered from garroting, she was garroted, which means strangulation. Typically, it's usually a specific, chain.
Yeah, and it's also has been used as a torture method because you can kill someone or you can just keep them just barely alive. Yeah. And she was garroted with a paintbrush or with a paint tool that was from the house. Everything that killed her was in the house. Right. We can assume. But what happened first before the strangulation was a hit to her skull, and people have speculated that was maybe a flashlight that was found on the kitchen counter. Some people have said baseball bat, but she was hit. She was unconscious for about an hour or two before she was strangled.
And this is one theory. Again, these are conflicting theories. So one theory is, the police department's theory is that she was hit on the head and she died from being hit on the head, and then everything else was staged, pretty much. And of course, if you read the police report, it goes into more detail than that. But a Reader's Digest version would tell you just that. If you were to look at Detective Lou Smith, who was the lead homicide detective at the time, as well as other detectives that later on were a part of the case, or even just wanted to look at the case for different documentaries, they believed that the hit on the blow to the head came later. They believed that first she was strangled. Because because first they believed that she was strangled because there were little marks on her neck, and they believed those were her fingernail marks. Of course, there's not enough evidence.
The two marks here,
those were separate.
Because those were maybe a taser or something.
Those were separate. So there was also two distinct marks right here, and investigators and pathologists that have worked on victims that were tased, they say that looks like a direct marking from a taser. So one, that she was tased. Two, that she was strangled first before she passed out, because why would she have fingernail marks if she was passed out? That's not something that you would stage, because she was physically trying to get herself removed from that restraint, if that is true. But there are, if you look at the pictures, there are little half a moon shaped marks on her neck that would resemble a little girl's fingernail marks. So it depends on the theory. What theory are you looking at? The police department versus investigators versus outside investigators. It's tough. They're all conflicting. They are.
What I will say is that if this person was trying to get away with a murder, for sure, and they did a really good job in confusing the medical examiner and making a really confusing autopsy report, so that even though we know what happened to her physically that night, we have no idea what happened to her. Right. If that makes sense. Right. The taser mark is bizarre. She has another bruise sort of around her neck, closer to her ear, honestly. And then again, I've heard both saying that she was strangled and then that she was hit in the head first. We have absolutely no idea, but the police work certainly didn't help. And there was the chief of Boulder Police recently went on Reddit for an Ask Me Anything, and I don't think he knew that Reddit was public, but let's hear a little clip about what he said on that Reddit Ask Me Anything.
But Beckner told readers police screwed up on the day of the crime. It was the Christmas holiday. They were short-staffed and didn't secure the crime scene. Finally, what will it take to solve this case? Beckner says it will only be solved through a confession.
Yikes.
It's just there's so much circumstantial evidence.
Right.
That points in either direction, either that an intruder came in, there's 200 pieces of evidence that an intruder did come in. And then there's amount of evidence that the police department has found that they believe points towards John and Patsy Ramsey. But
yeah, and I think it's worth noting that the chief of Boulder Police that we just heard from, the former chief of Boulder Police, only came on 7 months after the JonBenét Ramsey murder. So, he did this Reddit Ask Me Anything, and it's really interesting to read, but just bear in mind that he wasn't there on the day of the crime. He wasn't there at the scene, but he obviously did see all the documents and everything. I just thought it was interesting that, members of the police department have been pretty open, saying, yeah, we did screw this up. We didn't handle this as best as we could.
Initially, they didn't, and that's what's frustrating is if you hear accounts from Lou Smith, and Lou Smith, the reason why I keep gravitating towards the homicide detective Lou Smith is because he had the biggest reputation within that police department of solving cases. He was the head homicide detective. He had a lot of respect. People outside of the case that are world-renowned detectives that have also looked at the case all kind of point to Lou's work and say, Lou's got the most convincing theory here that an intruder came in. But with Lou ended up resigning from the police department because his theory conflicted with the police department's theory, and they actually stopped him from going in and gathering more evidence, even though he was on the force, because he was outside of what their narrative was that they were painting, they started to ostracize him to the point where he walked off and retired early. He still did his own independent research from home, and many people, he recently passed away, and many people have now started digging through his files, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot of that the 20th anniversary is coming about, and there's all these new documentaries and the CBS mini-series. So I think it's interesting that police officers now are saying that they screwed up when in the middle of it, Lou Smith was kind of like the black sheep that got ostracized for speaking out.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. You bring up independent research. And just between you and I, let's talk a little bit about the evidence that stands out to us as just observers and I hate whenever I do this show and I say fans of the case. We're not fans of JonBenét being murdered, but
we're intrigued by this case.
There you go.
It's very intriguing because there's no answers.
We need to come up with a better word, though, so that because I've been to websites researching this called like fan sites, and it's not, you're not fans, but you're intrigued, you're captivated by this murder. So I wanted to talk to you about what piece of evidence or pieces of evidence really stuck out to you when you're learning about this case. What do you think is, if you could have like a linchpin in this whole case, something that really brings it together for you?
I'll speak of a couple of things that don't add up to me on both sides. So number one, the fact that JonBenét had pineapple in her digestive tract.
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, I beat Grace to it.
The pineapple.
Beat Grace to it. So the Patsy Ramsey, the Ramseys have said from the very beginning, they have not wavered with the investigators that, they were coming home from a Christmas party. It was late at night. JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car. John, the father, brought her to bed. She never even woke up, and her brother attested to that. But then when the pathology report came out, she had like fresh pineapple in her digestive tract, meaning she had to have eaten that pineapple right before she was murdered. And there was a bowl in the kitchen with Patsy's finger marks on that bowl of pineapple.
Burps.
So exactly. So if she had pineapple on the way to bed, that's typically normal. That's fine. A little girl is hungry before she goes to bed. But the fact that they never brought that up while they were interrogated is suspicious. But then to the parents, to the family's benefit, the evidence on the flip side, I would have to say, and there is a lot of evidence pointing to an intruder. And this all comes from Detective Lou Smith. I think the idea that just doesn't add up to me. One, why would you need to tase your own daughter? If indeed if the taser marks are taser marks, why would you need to tase her first? If this is your daughter, your daughter is going to listen to you initially. Why there's no history of violent psychosis behavior in this family? None at all. You can be arrogant. She's been described as arrogant. That doesn't mean that you're a violent person. There's absolutely no history that they would commit such a brutal murder. And there are signs that somebody did come in. There are signs that there were footprints in the snow, even though that wasn't documented.
I know, that's another thing.
There is signs that an intruder did. The basement window was open. Yes, that could have been planted somehow. But
or it could have happened at any point in time.
Yes, but there are signs. And I think for the police department to say that there were zero signs that an intruder entered this home is gravely unfair to this family, because then the public at the time watching is like, oh gosh, there was no signs that an intruder came in. Then it's definitely the parents, when that's not the case. There were signs and evidence pointing to an intruder as well. And they should have said both sides, because it was unfair that the court of public opinion immediately blamed these parents. And maybe they did murder her. Maybe they did, but there wasn't enough evidence. There's still not enough evidence to directly say that.
And that's why even though a grand jury said, issued the bill saying, oh, you can indict this family, the district attorney said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to win this.
And she did that based off of DNA evidence, though. And the DNA
Oh,
evidence.
no, I'm talking about prior.
Yes.
They had
before the exoneration.
Before the exoneration, they went before a grand jury saying, can we indict, John and Patsy Ramsey?
It's too circumstantial.
They came back. They're like, you can if you want to. The DA said, no, I'm not
going to.
That's
why the DA said, I'm not going to.
It's too circumstantial.
Way too circumstantial.
The piece of evidence for me that I can't get my mind around for the life of me is the ransom note and everything about the ransom note. What's written in it is already bizarre. The fact that they say, let me just read you the beginning of this ransom note. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that you serve. So initially, this is a terrorist organization, and then it's about 2.5 pages long. I would even round up to 3. It's signed with just victory. Begins with Mr. Ramsey. By the end of it, it's, killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. That good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. So it just becomes very personal, very bizarre. The fact that it was written in the Ramsey household, there's evidence to indicate that they wrote it out more than once, because there were multiple pages missing from this pad that was left by the phone, because kids back in the day, when you took a phone call, you had to write it down because you couldn't do it on your cell phone, so you'd have to write down the messages.
You remember that, Grace? I remember that, but
I've been told people used to do that.
I remember, and your phone number is? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah. And so multiple people, not multiple people, multiple pages were taken from this book, from this.
So there was
this
drafts.
pad of paper.
Possibly there were drafts.
Possibly there were drafts of this. Who has the time when you're murdering a child in the home of these people that you clearly have know?
Right. And how could you have not waking them up? I don't care whether it was through tasing her, and I know it was in a cellar, and this is a over 6,000 square foot home, but I don't know.
How could you not have heard
those? I agree with you. And then the $118,000 sum is a very specific number. He just got a bonus. So
that was
very few people
He got a bonus
knew that.
for that exact same amount. That was his Christmas bonus.
Right.
Was the amount that was named in the ransom letter.
So it's bizarre. Was this someone that knew him? Was this him? Was this the son? Was this someone in their workforce? It's someone that they've worked with, but it doesn't. And there's weird slogans in that letter too that point to similar dialogue in certain big blockbuster movies that also play of hostages.
Not to mention that the Mel Gibson movie Ransom was playing in theaters at the time of this murder.
I know.
Guys, so much to talk about here. We want to hear from you in the comment section below. Please let us know what is your favorite or most interesting, captivating piece of evidence from the JonBenét Ramsey case. When we come back, we're going to be talking about theories and conspiracies and the legacy of JonBenét 20 years later. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.